There's a woman I want to tell you about. Let's call her Maren. If you asked anyone who knew her whether she was selfish, they'd laugh. She remembered birthdays. She showed up to things. She'd give you her last $20 if you needed it. And yet somehow, every close relationship in her life eventually developed the same quiet exhaustion. Friends started screening her calls. Her sister started forgetting to invite her to things. Nobody could quite say why, because on paper Maren gave constantly. Carl Jung would tell you that's exactly the kind of selfishness that survives detection for decades. Because we've all been trained to look for the wrong symptoms. We look for someone who takes too much. We don't look for someone who simply can't see anyone else's experience as fully real. Here's the question I want you to carry through this whole video, because I think it's going to land differently by the end. Have you ever been told you were being selfish, and your honest, immediate reaction was confusion, not guilt, not defensiveness, just genuine confusion, because from where you were standing, you weren't doing anything wrong at all? Hold that. We're coming back to it, and here's something that might surprise you before we even start the list. The most selfish people are very often not the ones chasing money, status, or attention. Jung would point you towards something quieter and much harder to spot. People whose inner world is so loud that other people's inner worlds simply don't register as real in the moment. Let's get into the 6 signs. Sign 1. Your apologies explain more than they acknowledge. Listen closely the next time you apologize to someone, or the next time you hear yourself getting ready to. There's a version of an apology that sounds like, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, that must have hurt you." And there's a version that sounds like, "I'm sorry, but I was really stressed, and you know how I get when I'm stressed, and honestly, I didn't even mean it like that." Notice the shape of the second one. It opens with the word sorry, and then spends 3 times as many words explaining why the other person shouldn't actually be that upset. Let me make this concrete with a scene, because it's much easier to spot in someone else than in your own mouth. Picture a man named Alec who forgets his partner's work event, the one she'd mentioned 3 separate times, the one where she actually needed him there for support. She brings it up, clearly hurt, and he says, "I'm sorry, babe. Honestly, work has been insane this month. I've barely had time to think. You know how it gets when the quarter ends." Listen to what just happened in that sentence. The word sorry appears once, right at the start, and then the rest of the sentence, the part that actually gets remembered, is a guided tour of his own stress, his own workload, his own difficult month. By the time he finishes talking, the conversation has quietly relocated. It started as "you hurt me" and ended as "let me update you on how hard my life is right now." His partner is left in a strange position. She came in with a grievance and somehow leaves the conversation feeling like she should be comforting him about his busy quarter. That's not an accident of phrasing. That's the apology doing exactly what it was unconsciously built to do, not repair the hurt, but redirect attention back toward the person who caused it. This is what Jung would call an undeveloped relationship with the ego. Not in the casual sense of ego, meaning arrogance, but in the technical sense. The part of you that organizes your experience around being the main character of every situation. A real apology requires temporarily stepping outside that main character position and fully inhabiting someone else's experience of what you did. That's a genuinely difficult psychological maneuver. Most people, most of the time, can't actually do it. They perform the words of an apology while quietly building the case for why they shouldn't have to mean them. Here's a way to catch yourself doing this. After you apologize, ask whether the sentence that followed the word sorry was about the other person's pain or about your own intentions. "That must have really hurt" is about them. "I didn't mean it that way" is about you wearing the costume of an apology. Sign 2. You experience other people's needs as interruptions. I want you to picture something very ordinary. You're in the middle of telling a story, a good one, you're enjoying telling it, and a friend interrupts, not rudely, just to mention something urgent happening in their own life. Something they need to talk through. Pay attention to the half-second of internal reaction before you consciously override it with kindness. For some people, that half-second is neutral, a small recalibration like changing lanes. For others, that half-second registers as something closer to a violation, an interruption, a theft of airtime that was rightfully theirs. Jung would say this reaction is diagnostic, not because it's evil, but because it reveals where the boundary of self actually sits for that person. For someone with a more developed sense of others as fully separate, fully real people, a friend's urgent need doesn't compete with their story. It simply matters, automatically, the way your own hand matters to you, without having to remind yourself to care about it. But for someone whose psychological development stalled at an earlier, more self-referential stage, other people's needs only register as real once they've successfully muscled their way past whatever the self was already doing. Let me make this concrete. Picture a man named Derek at a dinner with 4 friends. One of them mentions, almost in passing, that they got some difficult medical news that week. There's a brief pause around the table, the natural human pause where people are deciding how to hold this. Derek breaks it by saying, "That reminds me actually, something kind of similar happened to me last year," and proceeds to tell a 6-minute story about himself. He's not being cruel. In his head, he's relating. He genuinely believes he's connecting. He has no idea that what just happened from everyone else's seat at the table was a small, quiet erasure. The medical news and the person who shared it both got swallowed by his need to be part of the moment rather than witness to it. That's the sign, not rudeness. A kind of psychological gravity that pulls every conversation back toward the self, performed with total sincerity and zero awareness that it's happening. Sign 3. You mistake your comfort for fairness. Here's a sentence worth examining. "I just think we should split things evenly." On its face, that's the language of fairness. Nobody could object to evenness. But notice how often this phrase gets deployed specifically in moments where even happens to favor the person saying it. The roommate who insists chores should be split 50-50, conveniently measured in a way that values the chores they prefer doing. The friend who insists you take turns picking the restaurant, and somehow it's been 4 months, and you can't remember the last time it was actually your turn. Let me put a face on this. 2 roommates, Priya and Sam, split chores when they move in together. Priya suggests they divide tasks evenly. She'll handle the kitchen and the trash. Sam handles the bathroom and the floors. It sounds perfectly reasonable when she says it out loud, and Sam, wanting to be agreeable, says, "Sure, that works." What Sam doesn't notice for several months is that the kitchen, in their particular apartment, takes about 10 minutes a day. Quick wipe-downs, a load of dishes here and there, while the bathroom is the kind of job that eats 45 minutes and a fair amount of dread once a week. Priya didn't sit down and calculate this in some calculating, villainous way. She genuinely believes, in the moment she proposes it, that she's offering a fair split. But notice that the version of fair she landed on, without ever consciously deciding to tilt the scales, happened to be the version that worked out better for her. That's not a coincidence, and it's not malice either. It's what happens when fairness gets generated from the inside of one person's experience rather than checked against the other person's. Jung's read on this is sharp. Fairness, for the undeveloped ego, isn't an external, objective standard you measure yourself against. It's whatever standard happens to produce the outcome you already wanted. The genuinely uncomfortable test of fairness is whether you'd still call it fair if the outcome flipped against you. Most people never run that test on themselves because running it requires imagining a version of the arrangement where you lose something, and the self-referential mind doesn't naturally generate scenarios where it loses. Here's a quick gut check. Think of the last disagreement you had about what was fair between you and someone close to you. Would you have called the exact same arrangement fair if you were standing in their position instead of yours? If the honest answer takes you more than a few seconds, that's worth sitting with. Sign 4. Your generosity comes with an invoice. This one is uncomfortable, so I'll say up front, it doesn't mean every act of kindness is secretly transactional. But it's worth examining the kindness that comes with strings nobody agreed to. You help a friend move apartments on a Saturday. Genuinely kind, genuinely useful. 3 weeks later, you mention, half joking, that you could really use a hand with something, and they say they're busy. What happens in your chest in that moment? For some people, mild disappointment, quickly passing. For others, something closer to outrage. After everything I did for them? That outrage is the tell. It reveals that the original act of help wasn't a gift. Gifts, by definition, don't generate a balance owed. It was a loan, issued without telling the other party they were borrowing anything, with an interest rate only one person ever agreed to. Jung would say this is one of the most disguised forms of self-interest there is, because the disguise is so convincing it fools the person wearing it. You weren't lying when you helped your friend move. You genuinely wanted to help. But underneath the genuine desire to help sat a second, quieter expectation, that the help created a debt, payable on demand, and that the other person's failure to pay it represented a moral failing on their part, rather than a simple, ordinary instance of them having their own life and their own limits. Real generosity, the kind Jung would consider psychologically mature, gives without an invoice. It can feel disappointed when someone doesn't reciprocate. That's human. But it doesn't convert disappointment into resentment, because it never secretly believed it was owed anything in the first place. Sign 5. You narrate your pain faster than you notice theirs. Here's a test you can run on yourself almost every day. When something difficult happens to you and to someone close to you in the same general window of time, say you both had a rough week, notice which story gets told first, told longer, and gets followed up on more. For most people in this pattern, their own difficulty arrives at the front of their mind instantly, fully formed, ready to narrate. The other person's difficulty has to be specifically remembered, specifically asked about, often days later, often only because the other person brought it up again themselves. Picture 2 friends, Olivia and Beth, texting on the same Tuesday. Olivia had a brutal day at work. A project fell apart, she's stressed. She texts Beth a long paragraph about it the moment it happens, fully formed, every detail in order. Beth reads it, responds with care, asks good questions. Later that same week, it comes out that Beth's father was actually in the hospital that same Tuesday, something Beth mentioned briefly, almost in passing, days after it happened, and only because Olivia happened to ask how her week went. Olivia wasn't trying to be unkind. She simply never thought to ask sooner, because her own difficult day had occupied the entire foreground of her attention, full volume, instantly, while Beth's far more serious situation sat somewhere in the background until someone went looking for it. This isn't because such people don't care. That's the part that makes it so hard to catch. They genuinely do care, when reminded. The problem isn't the absence of empathy. It's the order of operations. Their own experience auto-loads. Everyone else's experience requires a manual refresh. Jung's concept of individuation describes the slow, difficult process of becoming a fully separate, fully developed self. One capable of holding your own experience and someone else's experience simultaneously as equally real, without either one needing to dim for the other to exist. Most people, most of the time, are still partway through that process. The sign isn't that you ever think about yourself first. Everyone does sometimes. The sign is whether anyone else's pain has ever fully entered your awareness without you having to be reminded it existed. Sign 6. You feel drained by people, not curious about them. Here's the last one, and it ties the rest together, so stay with me. Think about how you generally feel by default in the presence of someone else's long, detailed story about their life, their job stress, their family drama, their unresolved thing with a sibling. Not the performance of interest, the actual, automatic, gut-level feeling underneath it. For some people, even when they're tired, there's a flicker of real curiosity in there somewhere, a small, genuine wanting to understand this other, separate person more fully. For others, the dominant feeling is closer to depletion, a faint, guilty wish that the story would wrap up so the conversation could move towards something more interesting, namely, them. Jung would say, this is the clearest single indicator of where someone actually sits on the spectrum of psychological development, because it's nearly impossible to fake convincingly over time. You can fake the words of interest. You can ask the follow-up question on cue. But the felt experience of fascination with another consciousness, simply because it exists and is not yours, is very difficult to manufacture, and its absence eventually shows. People can feel, even when they can't articulate it, the difference between being listened to and being tolerated. So here's the thing that ties all 6 of these together, and it's not what you'd expect from a video with this title. Notice that not one of these 6 signs involves wanting more than your fair share, taking what isn't yours, or consciously prioritizing yourself over someone you claim to love. That's the version of selfishness everyone already knows how to spot and already knows how to condemn. It's almost too easy a target. The real, quieter form of selfishness Jung pointed toward isn't about wanting things for yourself. It's about a failure of imagination, an inability, not unwillingness, to fully register that other people's inner lives are exactly as vivid, as urgent, and as real to them as yours is to you. Not because you're cruel, because some part of your own development never quite finished the job of believing other people are real in the same way you are. That's a strange sentence to sit with, I know. But go back to the question from the start. The time you were called selfish and felt genuinely confused instead of guilty. Look at it again, against these 6 signs. Does the confusion still feel like evidence that you were misunderstood? Or does it feel, maybe for the first time, like evidence of exactly what we've been talking about? That from inside your own experience, the other person's pain simply hadn't fully arrived yet? Tell me honestly in the comments, which of these 6 actually stung a little? Not the one that reminds you of someone else, the one that, just for a second, made you go quiet. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.